Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another. Hang on, and I just heard the beep beep in the background. We do have somebody that has somebody talking in the background.
Give me a second.
We're good.
Is it good now?
Yep. Bye. Welcome to another edition of Clutching Our Pearls. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to communicate about communication. Today, we have the honor of having one of the world's best communicators on our show. Case competition is where Brenden started his career. Think about it as like rugby for speaking. He saw a future that placed him firmly as a lifelong employee. His goal of working for the big boys, which he did at PwC and IBM, didn't really capture everything that Brenden could do or could change in this world. And in 2013, his father lost his job, and their family sustained on mom's minimum wage income, most of which became liquid, which I'll let him explain later. He was able to attain one of his life goals in 2020 when he helped retire his hardworking mom. His unique story of being able to fund his way through college at Concordia in Canada through some truly unique opportunities combines his story of grit, commitment to family, and a vision that was much more than what the world had laid out for him. It's not only inspiring, it's fueled by love. Brenden is the founder of Master Talk, and he coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become part of the top 1% of communicators in their industry. He's got a wildly popular YouTube channel to like the tune of 25,000 subscribers called Master Talk, with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone in the world. Listen, no one gave a shit about Elon Musk when he was 16. He's not a great communicator. Brenden believes that the next Elon Musk is a 7-year-old girl with a communication coach. Brenden, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, you two. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're also thrilled today to be joined by our co-host, the incredible Mr. Steve Froisland.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me back. I'm glad to be co-hosting with Marie, especially with our great guest here, Brenden.
So, Brenden, I would love to hear a little bit more about your origin story. You and I have had a chance to talk, and I've asked you some wildly uncomfortable questions, and will continue to do so because that's kind of on brand for me. But where did you start, and how did you get to where you are today?
Absolutely, Marie. So I'll go through the classic origin, and then feel free to follow up, and we can start this process. Absolutely. So for me, the story started in Montreal. That's where I'm born and raised. Right, my parents immigrated from Sri Lanka in the early '90s with the hope of a better future. My mom arrived in Canada when she was 30 years old. Right, she saw snow for the first time. It was the first time she ever took a flight. And then I was born probably 6 or 7 years later after she flew in to Canada with my father, of course. And after that, what I realized very quickly was in Montreal, if you want to be successful in life, you need to know how to speak French. And I didn't know a flying word of French. So my parents sent me to French school so I'd learn the language. So my whole life, not only did I struggle with speaking, I was speaking a language I didn't know. So when I was in my first and second and third grade classroom, I would look at the audience and go, bonjour. And that was my life growing up as a kid. The second thing that happened when I was a kid was a surgery I had when I was 2 years old. I still have a crooked arm today. because of how it worked was when I was born upside down. So they accidentally, when they pulled me out of my mom with a vacuum, my left arm dislocated. So because of that, not only did I not know the language, I was also walking around like a little kid who didn't know French and who had a massive cast on. So I had a lot of social anxiety. And then a few years later, as you said so well, probably a few years, 14, 15 years later, I did all the case competitions, all that fun stuff, and started Master Talk. So there you go. There's the origin story.
So first of all, I think Steve and I can 100% relate with your snow story. We both grew up in Vegas, and in Vegas, it snows. What happens, Steve?
When it does snow, like the one time it snowed there for when we lived there, people go nuts. People go absolutely crazy. They're in awe. They're like, what is this? And then 5 minutes later, the snow goes away.
Yeah.
If it does manage to stick, everybody tries to drive in it, and that's just a big nightmare. But it very rarely snows there.
Yeah. Every kid runs out of their classroom. We all stand outside, staring straight up, catching like one snowflake in our mouth. It's the most amazing thing. And then you're like, oh, okay, it's cold water from the sky. Cool. Everybody pull it back together. Pull it back in. So part of your story that I think is really incredible is that you managed to go to university being supported by a mom who was making minimum wage. And it sounds a little bit like dad was not a massive contributor in that scenario. How on earth did you, like, I tried to put myself through college and I worked myself into the hospital 3 times trying to go to community college and working two full-time telemarketing jobs. How did you make it through school?
Absolutely, Marie. So what I'll say is for the first 12 years of my life, my dad definitely was a big contributor. So he worked as a warehouse manager at a company called AGM. It's like a hat company. And my mom, of course, was at a factory. So she recently worked at Canada Goose, and before that she was at like this kind of no-name factory for clothes before she retired, obviously. And in that situation, we were good. But when I got to around, let's say 13, 14 years old, my dad started making bad financial decisions with a lot of the money that we made. He bought like a big house in some other part of Canada that he thought was going to be a good financial bet, and it ended up being really bad, and we got into a lot of debt because of that. And then the other piece, of course, is that he lost his job when I was probably, I don't remember the exact year it was, but I think it was like around 2013. So probably like almost 10 years ago at this point. So when it got to that point, and I had my mom doing minimum wage, and me, because she never wanted me to work. That's something. It's like an Indian culture thing. They don't want us to work. They want us to just focus on our studies. It's like a South Asian thing. So even if I begged my mom, I was like, I need to get a job. She always refused. So instead, she just took on more and more credit card debt to keep us going. So we had probably accumulated at this point, I don't know the exact number, but it's probably like multiple 5 figures, like 20, 30, 40 grand in debt. And then when I was around 17, 18, before I got to university, I had the more fancier jobs that paid for everything. I had this really shitty job where I was at an eco center. And for those who don't know, an eco center is like where everyone goes to dump the stuff that you're not allowed to put in a garbage can. So it's like big batteries and these big rocks and like the paint and toxic chemicals. And I was getting paid $13 an hour to move a lot of the toxic chemicals from like one place to another. Luckily, it wasn't a dangerous environment to work, but I would always come home like plastered and like mud and toxic. And the worst part of all of it, and it really bruised my ego when I was younger, is most of the money I didn't even get to keep because I would have to give it back to my mom because she didn't really have any other money. So we needed it to pay off the debt. And then, of course, when I got to university, things paid off where I got a few paid internships in accounting. And that's how I was able to get a full ride through school.
Okay, hold the phone. So,
Sure.
first of all, we're like, I want to dive into kids that don't have the opportunity to go to university paid by mom and dad and, have a stipend and an apartment and all of those lovely things. But how do you do 3 internships and go to university? Like how does all that come together?
Right. And it's a fair question because I believe you're both based in the US. That makes sense, right? Because obviously the education in the US is ridiculous. It's like 10, 15, $30,000 a year. I don't even know what the number's at this point. But in Canada, we're very fortunate. It's not as expensive. It's probably $5,000 a year.
What?
Yeah, it's not that expensive. In Montreal specifically. So in Toronto, I think it's like 10 grand a year. But in Montreal, where we are in, like the specific city, the government of Quebec, which is the province I'm based in, actually subsidizes a lot of our education. So I have a lot to thank the Canadian government for my success.
Dude,
So,
Lily, we're moving to Quebec.
Seriously, I'm right behind you.
So first of all, like, trust me, with the amount of Americans right now that are considering moving to Canada, if they are not already on a plane at this moment or driving through and trying to get through customs, y'all get to Quebec, you can learn French, it's fine. But Steve and I both had very different experiences. That mine led me to entrepreneurialism. His led him to a very different experience. Steve, tell us a little bit of your story of how you went from being part of the illustrious alumni of the Las Vegas Academy of International Studies, Performing and Visual Arts to where you got within. You tell the story. You tell it. You're good.
Yeah, you know what? I will tell you everything. I have no secrets here. It was it was a very hard journey. I kind of fell into it by accident. I always wanted to work in a corporate environment, but when I first started out my career actually started in retail and then into hotel, and I worked in customer service, and it was just I knew the entire time I was in customer service for about 5 6 years, I knew it wasn't for me, and I always dreamed of working in a corporate environment, in an office, and get paid good money and be in front of a computer all day. And so I moved to Seattle from Las Vegas. This was back in 2004. And I told myself, you know what? I'm not going to do another customer service job. I don't care how long I have to live without an income. I just need a chance. And that chance happened through a temp position. I don't have a degree. I don't. In fact, I have a degree called a GED, and I didn't even get it until much later in life. I got it when I was 27, when I knew when I was going to try really hard for this corporate position. And I started out as a temp, and I just worked really hard, put in all the extra hours, and that temp position turned into um, a seasonal position, and then the seasonal position turned into a full-time position at Microsoft in recruiting. And I started out as in an entry-level administrative role in recruiting, and I learned from I just looked out for the smartest people I could find. I hung out with them. I latched myself onto them, and I learned as many things as I could learn to keep advancing. And it was really about the networking and the communication, and also taking advantage of everything that Microsoft had to offer. And I was very lucky to be with an employer that provided these fantastic classes, and from everything from project management to how to keep your inbox organized. I mean, and trust me, I took every class I could have I could attend. I even took a coding class, like a beginner coding class, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything that I was doing while I was in that coding class, and damned if I remember anything from it. I just took it just to take it. Um, so I never did end up going back to school, but I actually have some. I want to. That's why I'm like Marie. I'm right behind you. I'll be in college with Lily, um, learning some classes. But since I've landed, I've learned enough to become a data analyst. And I was a data analyst in Microsoft Human Resources for human resources, specifically for diversity and inclusion. And I left Microsoft, and now I'm at Seattle Children's Hospital as a data analyst for um, uh, diversity and inclusion in recruiting. And talk about a rewarding career. And I just have this untraditional way this untraditional path that I took. And I just really had to use my instincts to get through it, knowing that I didn't have education to lean on to get to where I really wanted to be.
And what I find absolutely fascinating about Steve's story, and Steve and I have been friends since I asked him what his sign was was it Madame Cotton's class?
Was it? It was an English class.
Oh,
Was
Mr.
that her name?
Mr. Betancourt.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a Leo, by the way, in case you're wondering.
And also, that was my first attempt at a pickup line, and it didn't work because he's gay. But I tried really hard.
It's
but
the effort that counts.
But what fascinating about that is if Steve had gone to interview for a job at Microsoft, they wouldn't have looked twice at him because he didn't have a degree. He didn't have a high school diploma. And I am fascinated by folks that have dreams of corporate careers because everything in my soul says, F that noise. Why the hell would you want to work through somebody else's program? Which is astutely why I'm an entrepreneur. And I think that part of what makes us the adults that we are is what we thought life was going to be like when we were children.
Right.
And how it actually turns out. And those of us that are lucky enough to have a variety of experiences get to make choices, especially if we have the ability to communicate effectively. And some of that comes from not only knowing who we are and why we are, which y'all know we don't actually get there until we're about 40. So keep on growing, keep on showing. You've got some lessons to learn. But communication is at the core, I think, of each one of our journeys.
No doubt.
Myself, I started working at 12, started belly dancing at 15, which I will say that I was not a very effective communicator with the Arabic community, although I did learn how to say, Yalla Habibti, let's go. But there's an openness to not only communicating effectively, but listening deeply to those that are around you. Brenden, what part did listening play in your journey?
Absolutely, Marie. And thanks for sharing your story, Steve, as well. It's super powerful,
Yeah.
brother. I
Thank
love
you.
that. Of course. Yeah. So I would say for me, listening has definitely played a massive role. Just in like, and by the way, it's still something I'm working on. By far not perfect, especially when you're as extroverted as I am. I always like to talk a lot. So listening has been a challenge for me for a long time. I feel for me, listening is starts or the willingness to get better starts when we get a certain reward. So what was the first reward that I got with listening? And honestly, it was a better relationship with my mom. It's nothing to do with business. You know, me and my mom used to fight all the time, all the time. And the reason is not because we're bad people or anything. It's because we grew up very differently. So my mom's from a country called Sri Lanka. It's like a third world country, and I'm born and raised in Canada. So it's those conflicting values. So when you're 11 years old and your mom looks at you and goes, "You can't eat at your friend's house," you just kind of question. You're like, why? I don't get it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So we'd always clash until one day I woke up and I asked myself an important question, Marie and Steve. What is it, the relationship that I actually want with my mom? It obviously doesn't come out as fancy as it did when I was 15. Now it comes out much more fancier, but you get it. And then I realized, you know what? I don't want to fight with my mom. So one day I just sat her down and I asked her the question that no 15-year-old boy asked their mother. Why? Why does it bother you that I go and eat at somebody else's house? And then I understood where she was coming from. So I spent 20 minutes listening to her. I don't remember the exact time. It was like 20, 25 minutes. And she was explaining how in Sri Lanka there was this massive civil war. People would always keep their doors locked. They wouldn't trust other people. And then it made perfect sense. And then after I finished listening to her, I said, Mom, we don't live there anymore. And then I got to go eat at my friend's house. And that was it. And that's when I first understood the power of listening. But the other piece, which I think is more of a tip, team, is what do people get wrong about listening? How do you actually practice it? So I've always believed that most people, when they communicate, is always statement, 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 statement. So it's a ping-ponging of statements. So let's say somebody asks us a question, what do you believe? Mary might say, hey, boom. Like, I believe this. This is why it's important for me. And then I'll say, oh, I believe this. And then Steve will say, I believe it. And then Marie will go, I believe this. And then it's kind of like a ping-pong. Whereas what great communicators do is that they replace their statements with questions. Why do you believe this, Marie? Why is that important to you? What is it about that topic that you find fascinating? So I encourage people to just ask more questions instead of just saying statements.
Well, and I think that for me, there's a tremendous amount of alignment there, because that's a form of professional love. When you're innately curious about somebody else's why, you get
Absolutely.
so much more about not only their experiences, but you get to expand your own knowledge about how the world works. And if you're going to be able to influence someone, you simply can't do it if you only do it through your own filter. Because what you know about life means jack shit to everybody else.
Yeah.
It's what they know about life. It's what they know about your business that actually counts. Steve, when you think about listening
Mm-hmm.
through your filter, which you have this incredible superpower of meta listening with data points, which is
Yeah.
super hot. What does listening mean to you?
You know what? I think to me, it's related to what you said. I think listening is an avenue towards growth, particularly asking why, and and also and asking why and listening to the answer instead of just hearing the answer, and taking the answer to heart. And so that is that I think that's one of the superpowers that I have gained. When I just want to rewind a little bit. When I was younger, you were absolutely right, Brenden. When I was younger, it's all about statement, how I feel. And as I got older and as I started to learn from other people and trying to absorb as much as I can in different careers, um, listening and just became an absolute necessity. And I had to really understand what was going on and what was being said, and apply it to my to apply it to my daily life and actually grow from it.
And listen, our audience we're not hanging out with a bunch of teenagers. All y'all that are under 20, please know that one, you are as adorable as a box of puppies, and don't let anybody tell you anything different. And
Mhm.
listening is going to be your superpower if you can obtain it now. By the time you are in a place to influence others, you're actually going to know what the hell you're talking about. But we've got a very sophisticated audience. That's a nice way of saying older. So for those folks that are in that place of ultimate sophistication, we are at a place where we want to be able to communicate effectively, whether it's with our children, which most of it's their fault, so or our partners, or our parents, or our audiences. But there's got to be an authenticity in that communication. Brenden, from your point of view, with the incredibly different life experiences that you've had, how do you start laying down the basis of communication in one-on-one circumstances before we get to the one-to-many circumstance?
Absolutely, Marie. So here's a good way of starting this conversation. I think will help us a lot. So my perspective is always, what is the point of communication? Right? What is the definition? And for me, how I define communication was very simple: is achieving a specific outcome for a specific audience. And that means anything. And what I mean by anything, really anything. It could be a group to many people, to your point, or it could be as simple as convincing our significant other that we should have Mexican food instead of Chinese food tonight. Right? It's about achieving a specific outcome for a specific audience. So with that said, what is the outcome that we should get excited about? I think what's missing in this industry, team, is excitement. Because a lot of us, when we think of communication, we think of it like a chore. It's negative. Oh, so much stress, so much anxiety. I got to do this. Nobody wants to get better at doing the dishes. Whereas my perspective, which is very different, think of it like a complete 180, is how would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? When was the last time we dreamed about our communication? We dream about the expensive vacations we want to go on, the friends we want to meet up, the big houses we want to buy, the Gucci purses that we want to buy at the store. When was the last time we talked about our communication? We got excited about it, we dreamed about it. And the answer for most of us is never. So I would start the conversation there. Because for all of us, and that's what's fun about communication, you two, is that the answer is different for all of us. So for our super sophisticated audience listening to this, in some cases it might be, I don't really care about speaking on a stage, but it doesn't need to be a stage. It could just be the way that you talk to your mother, the way that you talk to your kids, the way that you travel, the way that you order food at a restaurant. Find one facet of communication, not a million, but one facet where you go, that is something I really desire. And then from that desire point, then craft a strategy around how do I get that? And then move to the next part of communication. Then we topple it on top of the other.
Steve,
Yeah.
did you have something?
That's, I mean, it's profound. You definitely got my attention.
And so I think, especially in the political climate that the states find themselves in, which is basically just fucktarded on many levels, we've all stopped communicating because it is a world of statements as opposed to questions, oppositions as opposed to opportunities for alignment, and fear. Absolute earth-shaking fear. How do your theories of effective communication take on challenges like losing your rights to your own personhood, or justifying an insurrection when it seems like the loudest voice in the room, or the one that is the most funded, is going to be heard? Not to throw anything deep at you. Welcome to Clutching Our Pearls.
It's all good. Can you define insurrection for me? I actually don't know what that means.
Oh, that's when a bunch of assholes attacked the Capitol of the United States in an attempt to prevent the president from being sworn in and actually transitioned. It was fun.
I got. Which is a lesson, by the way. If the communication experts ask for definitions, it means imagine what you could do with your life. If I can barely speak English. So yes. So to your point, here's what I would say. Because really the question, I believe, is how do we communicate in situations that are highly sensitive, where there's a lot of different points of view Kind of like abortion, right? Some people are pro-life, pro-choice, and it's like very touchy. Here's where I start the con, because it's obviously there's no silver bullet here. There's no magic potion we can all drink and get the right answer. Unfortunately, maybe some other guest. I mean, I'd love to learn from this person, but from my experience, there's a couple of things that I'll say, and I'm happy to go into the deeper waters there. But I would start with get better with easy people. Like start with easy topics, folks. Like for example, I'll give you an easy one with mental health, like setting boundaries, right? Knowing how to communicate boundaries effectively. Don't start with people you don't like. Like, why are you making your job hard for the sake of making it hard? Most people can't get the basics right. Start to communicate more effectively with the people who want to support those boundaries and give you coaching and feedback on that specificity, and then apply those boundaries to everyone else. So, like, I would argue for someone like you, Marie, like you're a badass now. No, you could just set your boundaries to everyone, right? But obviously, and me too, and I would argue Steve as well. But when we start the journey, it definitely isn't that way. So I would encourage people to take those small little steps, because going from 0 to 1 is way harder than 1 to 100 in communication. Taking that first step is actually the biggest challenge. But now to go into the deep work, let's assume we went from 0 to 1. How do we have those sensitive conversations? I always start them with, what do we have in common? What do we have in common? Right? What can me and you agree on? So I always start that way. Because for me, especially in the context of politics, I don't talk politics much, though we can if you want to. But I think for me, like, I always get confused with politics. Because I'm like, why are everyone disagreeing all the time when we all watch the same movies? We all go to the same restaurants. We all eat the same Big Macs. We all complain about the same things. So why are we so worried about the 2% that we disagree with? So I would start every conversation with what we have in common. And that could be through deep questions, like what's your favorite TV show, things like that. We laugh it off. And then that is used as a lubricant for harder conversations in the next few minutes or few hours as that conversation develops. And then the last piece is, and this is hard, because you asked me a hard question, I have to give the hard answer. And the hard answer is, if you want to get better at sensitive conversations, this is actually what you need to do. You need to start listening to people who have completely different opinions of you and assume they're right. Aha! Right? I actually watched this YouTube video channel that you guys might be familiar with, since you guys are an odd crowd like me, called Soft White Belly on YouTube. And basically the thesis of the YouTube channel is they interview people from very broken homes. Like, some of them are like heads of the KKK, some of them, it's crazy. Like, and I actually listen to all these videos, even if I fundamentally disagree with everything they have to say. I ask myself, in what ways are these people right? But most people aren't willing to do that. That's why we struggle as a society.
Okay, so first of all, like, I have chills on parts of my body that I didn't know could have chills
Okay.
from what you just said. Like, you hit some really powerful points. And one of the tenets that I've always worked towards is that having difficult conversations is easier when you know what the desired outcome is. And that doesn't have to be having a winner. I'm not expecting to make sure that you agree with me at the end of this conversation. My expectations are that we can hear each other and love each other anyway. And if we are able to align, that's great. If not, that's okay too. I'm going to love you anyway. And that gives people space to, one, know that a conversation does not have to be combative. There doesn't have to be a winner. But that if we can't come out of this loving each other, then we have failed at the exercise. You specialize in helping people communicate on stages. So you do the one to many. When you are taking people through the process of learning how to be effective communicators, whether it's through their industry or even through things like I speak on grief. It's really hard to talk about grief. It is terrifying for most people because we still like to believe that it's never going to happen to us. But there's moments where I have to make impact because only 10% of my job is done on stage. 90% of my job is to make the audience have a different thought experience or take an action afterwards. How do you take those folks that are speaking about things that are not necessarily rote, they're not instructional, and embolden or empower them to influence?
Beautiful question, Marie. I would say, we already talked about the dreaming part. So that's actually the first step. And the reason I reemphasize it, so it's so important, is because there needs to be a burning desire. Why is it worth speaking about grief? Why is it so important for us? Because there's going to be so many obstacles along the way. And it's not about money. It's about objections from the audience, questions that you might not be comfortable answering within the context of your subject matter. It's that burning desire. And once we have that clear reason, even some form of it doesn't need to be perfect. That's what pushes us to get the job done. So now, with that burning desire in place, or some of it in place, how do we then move into creating an experience, a workshop, an environment where people have that key takeaway? And you actually touched upon the answer well, Marie, which is you got to start with the lesson first. If there is only one thing that people take away from any media that you do, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a stage, whether it's a workshop, what do you want them to leave with? And for me, to use an example, for me, it's simple. I just need to convince people that they can be great communicators. And if people are convinced that they can be great communicators, my job's done. Because they'll do everything else. They'll watch the videos. They'll do everything else, right? They'll get the help that they need to be successful. And first, we need to be clear about that. And it won't be 100% clear at the beginning, but just reflecting on that idea will help us. And then the other piece is what I call efficiency. How do we efficiently build up momentum that keep that excitement going with our communication so that we keep working on it over the long term? So what does that look like in my world? How that looks like in my world is an analogy I call the puzzle method, right? Which is jigsaw puzzles. You know those toy puzzles we used to play as kids? Those little pieces?
Oh, we all picked them up during COVID because we were bored as hell.
There you go, right? So here's a simple question for both of you. Hopefully this analogy works and both of you come up with the same answer, but let's see. The question is simply this. When you both work on puzzles, which pieces do you start with first and why?
The edges.
Edges and outers.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's go to Steve. Why the edges?
That's a good question. I think it's easier because you have less sides that you have to mitigate.
Absolutely. Marie, anything you want to add to that?
The corners are easier to identify because they ain't got shit on the other side.
Exactly. Simple. Both of you are correct. Absolutely. And they're easier to find in the box. So you put them together, work your way into the middle. So you're probably wondering, why is bringing up puzzles in a communication in a conversation about communication? The reason it has everything to do with communication, because most of us, when we build the jigsaw puzzle of our speeches, workshops, we always start with the middle. We shove a bunch of content, shove. We get to the presentation, and it sounds something like this. We ramble throughout the whole thing, and the last slide. Thanks. It's terrible. So whether you're talking about grief, whether you're talking about public speaking, any topic, you just can't do that. So instead, what I recommend people do is work it like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Do the intro 50 times until it's perfect. And 50 seems like a big number. It's not, because the introduction is like 90 seconds. So it'll take you like an hour. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. So same thing for the close, and then work your way into the middle. Last thing I'll say on this, especially in the context of harder, more sensitive topics, I always like to say this. personal stories don't have to be traumatic. I feel that needs to be said because a lot of the people I've worked with over the years feel like they need to go from A to Z right away. Right? Like I
Mhm.
had an alcoholic father, I had a very dysfunctional household, but I wasn't ready to talk about those things until maybe 2 years ago, which is 5 years into my career. So what I always encourage people to do is for you to be relatable to your audience, you don't need to go straight into Z. Start with what you're comfortable first. Something like I used to tell a story, and I still do, called the blueberry story, which is a story basically around how I work 14 hours a day in my basement, which I still do. But the reason my mom and my sister love me and don't complain about the fact that I work most of the time is because of blueberries. Because every time at 5 p.m., when I go upstairs to get my son blueberries, I always ask them if they want some first. And the moral to that story is it's the little things that count, not the big things over time. And the reason I tell that story is because I'm comfortable sharing it and it's relatable and people remember it. So start with what you're comfortable with. And as you build momentum and you get more mature as a thought leader, like Marie and Steve as examples, because now you guys have been doing this a lot, you're comfortable talking about your past experiences, then you jump into that. But I would never advocate for jumping right away. I think it's too much pressure for people.
Yeah, and I completely appreciate that. And I think there are a lot of people that know that their stories have value.
Mm.
Small, the large, and everything in between. Some of it's weird as hell, but it's got value. But there are also people that are in this world that have neurodiversities that don't necessarily have the words at the ready. How do we support those people? And I know that I've blanketly said neurodiversities. There are a tremendous amount of neurodiversities that are out there. I know that I personally have dyslexia and ADD, which means that at any given time, I've got 35 hamsters doing a fucking kick line in my head that are all looking for the same amount of attention because they're stars. Makes it very hard to focus on a stage. But I also don't go up there with notes because I want to be authentic. Steve, what are the things
Yeah.
that you're challenged with?
So you know what? I am all about public speaking. I would love to tell stories to an audience. Um, and I about 10 years ago, I went through a 5-year battle with bone cancer. Well, or I lovingly refer to it as boner cancer. And the chemo was so aggressive that I was left with aphasia. And for those who don't know what aphasia is, it's where you have some brilliant thoughts in your mind, you have huge vocabulary, but something happens from your brain to your mouth, and either you just forget completely what your brain is trying to say, or it just doesn't come out right. And I have that problem, and I went through months of speech therapy, and still to this day I have a hard time connecting my words. So talk about neurodiversity. I actually, that's the first time I've heard that term, Marie, and it's fantastic, and I'm glad you brought it up because I'm curious, Brenden, what your take is on that.
For sure, you too, and thanks for sharing your story once again, Steve. It's really powerful. Wow, I would say for me, most of the people I've worked with in that category are generally people with autism. That's usually where most of my expertise is. So I can definitely speak on that, but we can feel free to expand on that further. I would say from my experience, team, the only difference is the approach and how we coach them. So what I found a bit different with neurodiversities is that they just need a little bit more encouragement. So for example, if somebody gets the filler words right, actually let me give it a simpler example. So let's say somebody goes from 50 filler words like ums and ahs in a speech to like 20. That's obviously a big deal. But with somebody with neurodiversity, what I generally do is I make a big deal, even small adjustments in their communication. So if they go from 50 to 45, I would go, whoa, like that's amazing. We got 5. So I would celebrate more often with that community. But to be honest, from experience, they all turn out to be exceptional speakers anyways. And the reason is because the environment that we create for them. So I think the biggest part is that we need to celebrate the smaller wins. We need to change the mindset that they have around communication. And the third piece specifically that Steve mentioned around connecting words and having trouble with that, I teach an exercise that of course I'm happy to talk about, which is called the random word exercise. So all it is you pick a random word like phone or like a cup or steel, and we have them create random presentations out of thin air. I would say most people neurodiversities in my ecosystem, they always say they can't do the exercise. So it's never about doing it better. It's just a binary thing. I can't do this exercise. So when they just do it once, I go, didn't you say you weren't able to do this? And then I just keep refining them with the same question that I keep repeating, which is simply what else is possible with their communication skills. And eventually, whether they have neurodiversities or not, they just go, anything's possible, and then we have them. So yeah, not much to comment there, but that's what I have.
Well, and one thing that I will say is in my years of speaking, which, listen, I tossed my butt on a stage when I was 25 and had no business speaking on business, but I also have no fear, so they went well together. When you can engage the audience in what your experience is going to be, you now have permission and space. Chances are everybody in that audience is happy that you're the one on stage and not them. Because what is one of the number one fears in this world? Death and public speaking, right? The audience is on your side, even if you don't feel like they are. If you trip, if you lose your words, they're silently rooting for you to come back. And so stating at the beginning of your conversation, listen, I'm here today to talk to you about blueberries and boner cancer, but I want to share something with you. I have a challenge. It's called aphasia. Sometimes I lose my words. Sometimes I need to take a moment and a breath to be able to come back to my point. I'm pretty sure that a few of you out there have had the same experience, even if you don't suffer from the same condition. So, if it's okay with you, I'd like to share my story and ask for a little bit of grace as I get there. Those kinds of moments of connection take us out of being other and create an us. And for me, speaking has always been about creating an experience of us. If we cannot engage the audience in a way that allows them to feel seen, allows them to connect with what the content is and where they are in their journey, and create an emotional connection to the content being provided, we haven't really broken through the boundaries of communication. There is nothing that can happen to you on stage that is going to make an audience hate you for the rest of their lives. Right? So you go up on your lines. So you trip over the microphone cord. So you have to look at your notes. There is always going to be one person in that audience that is there with you in heart. And what I've learned about audiences is that when something happens for one person in the audience, whether they feel like you're making eye connection with them, or they laugh, or they say yes. People in a diagram of 6 to 8 around them have the same or a similar experience. That's why I always have audience plants. Don't tell anybody. Because when they laugh, it gives permission to those around them to laugh. When they say yes, it gives permission to everyone around them to say yes. And when they have an emotional experience, which emotions are energy and they can be felt, it allows that energy to sweep through those around them. Communication is about so much more than getting your words right. It's about understanding what your message is and caring about what the audience needs from you in that moment. You don't have to win them all over at the same time. You simply need to show them that you care enough to show up, know what you're talking about, even if the words aren't perfect,
Mm.
and care about what happens next that truly makes impact. But I will say that Brenden is the expert at getting you there. One of the things that made me know that Brenden is one of our people is that he gives before he ever asks. If you visit Brendan's website, which is rockstarcommunicator.com, every 3 weeks, he does a free communication training. You can find him on LinkedIn at Brenden, that's with a Brenden, followed by a Kumarasamy. Kumasari. I messed it up. Did I get it?
Kumar-san, it's okay.
Kumasari. You can find him on Instagram at Master Your Talk, but definitely find him at Master Talk on YouTube, because that is where the bulk of his brilliant and free and love-laden content is. We all have a story to tell. We all have an impact to make in this world. You playing small does not serve the universe. We are all meant to shine as children do. Who are you not to be fabulous, fearless, loved, and powerful? If you don't speak up, who will? And if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? There's a lot of things that we're up against these days. I already sound way more sophisticated than I ever intended. But we're under no false pretense that the world is functioning the way that we had always dreamed. You've got the ability to influence, whether it's from a stage or in a family conversation. Brenden, Steve, and I invite you all to begin using your voice, not only to influence others, but to start conversations that can impact true change. I want to thank you, Brenden, for being part of our podcast today. I know that we are out of the norm of the stages that you usually grace, but you have been incredibly graceful in our space. And I
Thank-
think
Oh, whoops.
Agreed.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was a pleasure to be on.
and like I said earlier, when we are out there sharing our message, 10% of it is what happens when we're speaking. The other 90% is what happens when we're done. So I'm going to ask the audience to take this opportunity to not only visit Brendan's website, be there for one of his communication masterclasses, take advantage of the love that he's putting into this world for free. But y'all, we got a lot more to change. Follow the revolution. We are here to make impact that will not only change our lives, but the lives of the people that we love and the humans that they have made. You can find us on every platform